can be manipulated is by actually deliberately targeting us. And tragically, aid workers do lose their lives, trying to offer assistance to people who need it. And when that happens, it becomes impossible for us to do our job. We generally have to leave, certainly the project area, and in the most extreme situations, the country that we're working in.
Short-term aid is usually for relieving emergencies. Long-term aid is to help develop a country's future. War costs money, lots of it. The defence budget of the UK since the year 2000 has risen 54% to £37.3 billion. The war in Iraq cost the UK approximately £7 billion. That sum could have cleared the £512 million NHS hospital deficit 13 times over. If conflict is financially draining for wealthy and developed nations, it's even more devastating for poorer countries. The most significant indicator of conflict is hunger. If the economic growth of a country falls 5%, the chances of conflict doubles. Conflict nearly always involves destruction of buildings, power and transport systems. Even if there is enough food and water to aid recovery, it is difficult to distribute if roads are destroyed. The death toll often means there are fewer people to rebuild the community. Prevention of conflict is better than cure. Research shows that it's cheaper to prevent conflict than fix it afterwards. The UK government estimates a 1:4 ratio. That means for every £1 spent on prevention of conflict, it saves the international community £4 in trying to rebuild afterwards. Preventing conflict is never easy. There are steps that the international community can take. They can try to resolve conflict through diplomacy and peace talks. They can encourage disarmament. They can send in peacekeeping forces like the United Nations. Sometimes the international community will impose economic sanctions to force governments to rethink destructive policies. Sadly, despite the good intentions behind sanctions, it's often the civilians who suffer most while war still continues.
The sanctions that were imposed on the Rhodesian government from 66 through to 79, when agreement was reached for majority rule, initially had its hardships because so much of the normal consumables we had was imported, usually from South Africa. But there were other imports that were coming through from the rest of the world. And the country became self-sufficient because of that. Those sanctions.
Now that the link between poverty and conflict is undeniable, the way to reduce conflict is obviously to reduce poverty. The Drop the Debt campaign was spearheaded by U2's Bono to encourage the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to cancel 100% of the debts owed by the world's poorest countries. Avoiding conflict is cheaper than restoring a country afterwards. Debt relief allows developing countries to spend on infrastructure. Afghanistan is a country which is right in the middle of Asia. It is bordered by Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and China. It has been a centre for trade, culture and migration for centuries. However, its position at the crossroads between East and West means it also has a long history of invasion. In 1979, Communist Russia invaded Afghanistan. The US and Allied forces fought the Soviets and armed the local Mujahideen. The Russians withdrew in 1989, but not before 2 million people had died and 5 million more had fled to neighbouring countries, mostly Pakistan. This drain of citizens and intellectuals caused a leadership imbalance in Afghanistan. This allowed the Taliban regime to enter and take over. The world was slow to react to the Taliban's suspected human rights abuses, partly due to the restriction of press. But after the terrorist attacks of 9/11 by Al-Qaeda, the world got heavily involved. A US-led coalition moved into Afghanistan and succeeded in largely pushing out the Taliban. Democracy has been restored, but Taliban resurgence still remains a threat, so coalition troops remain in the country in order to train Afghanis to defend their own country. The timing for the withdrawal of Allied troops is hotly debated. Ravaged by war, destruction and mass immigration, Afghanistan suffers terrible poverty. There is much development and overseas investment required to rebuild Afghanistan into a prosperous country. But there is hope. Over 3.5 million refugees have returned to Afghanistan since 2001 and have opportunities to rebuild lives. Communications have been restored. Agriculture is improving. A successful new cash crop which is trying to replace the illegal poppy trade is pomegranates. New schools are being built to improve low literacy rates and afford people more opportunities. New universities are being built where both men and women are free to study and work towards a better future for Afghanistan. Afghani refugees feel safe enough to return to their homeland. Education is an essential tool in developing the country's future. The consequences of conflict are terrible and far-reaching. If the key to reducing conflict is to reduce poverty, then that is what the international community needs to prioritise.